Good afternoon, everyone, and you're very welcome to this webinar, Engaged Assessment in the Creative Arts, which is part of the Reimagining the Creative Arts Curriculum and Canon webinar series at NUI Galway. The series is supported by the National Forum for the Enhancement of Teaching and Learning in Higher Education and NUI Galway. I'm Dr. Frances McCormack, she and her, and I'm a lecturer in English, and I'm very much looking forward to talking through this topic of engaged assessment today. As you can see, we have a panel of speakers from a range of different disciplines. We have Liz Quirk from English, Katie Feeney from music, Laura Heenahan from music, Aoife Delaney-Reid from drama and theatre, and Anna Doyle from Drama and Theatre too. Now, one of the aims of the Creative Arts Curriculum and Canon webinar series is to enhance teaching and learning in the creative arts, particularly by thinking about the relationship between what is taught and what is produced. And that's a relationship that flows in both directions. So today we're going to talk about how engaged assessment can feed into and feed from that process. So I'm really excited to start this discussion today. And so I'm going to introduce our speakers in reverse alphabetical order. And so first up is Liz Quirk, who is a poet and scholar from County Kerry. And as an Irish Research Council funded PhD researcher, Liz is pursuing a creative practice project entitled When They Talk About Mothers, investigating queer kinship in contemporary poetry. Her debut poetry collection is published with Salmon Poetry, and it's been described as a collection of hard-won poems that rise out of a larger silence, redoing the lyrics of Maura McEntee and Evan Boland for 21st century Ireland. And Liz's second collection, How We Arrive in Winter, is due to be published later this year. Liz, it's lovely to talk to you today. Can you tell us a little bit more about your work, please?
Thanks very much for the introduction, Frances. My work is very much rooted in sort of autobiographical poetry. I deal a lot with the body and the ways in which people interact with each other, how kinship is formed, and how we sort of interact through the world through that veil of kinship. My first collection very much was about a sort of journey from innocence to experience in becoming a mother to my two young daughters. That collection was kind of more or less, it was published when the eldest was about 3 and the eldest is now 7. So there's a lot of road been walked since. So it was very much a space for me to explore lyric poetry, to kind of see where I could insert myself into the Irish poetic tradition. I was asking a lot of questions of myself and was kind of trying to answer them in the form that I was writing in. So I wrote that collection is primarily lyric, and then publishing with Salmon sort of fulfilled an aim of inserting myself into a kind of a wealth of heritage. Seeing as the press, I think there's 150 women poets have been published by Salmon with probably the same amount of male poets. So it's viewed as a feminist press, even though like equality is kind of the name of the game. So that's kind of very fascinating for me. The second collection then deals with more sort of life and death scenarios. It's about how kinship changes when key members, say, of a family or a kinship unit disappear through death or through other sorts of loss. So my exploration poetically is a little more fragmentary, and I'm being a little more experimental on the page, and I'm asking a lot more of the page as well. The poems aren't as neatly formed. There's a lot of sort of rugged terrain in that collection.
That's wonderful. Thank you, Liz. And I think we'll pick up on some of these themes as we hear from our other speakers today, particularly about the nature of identity and how that is both shaped by and in turn shapes the creative process. Thank you so much. Laura Heenahan is a third-year music student in NUI Galway. She's a pianist and a member of the newly formed Mayo Traditional Orchestra, which rehearses online. And she has experience accompanying her school choir throughout her secondary years as pianist. And throughout her work at NUI Galway, she's developed and fostered and nurtured an interest in composition. So Laura, we would love to hear from you um, about your own practice.
Thanks very much, Frances, for that. And thanks for having us as well. So me and Katie, we did the editing and transcription module run by Dr. Aidan Thompson. And we edited and transcripted Elaine Agnew's work, Missa Brevis. So it was great to do that. I'm doing composition mostly all this semester. So even though the editing and transcription module wasn't based around composition, I still thought it was such a great opportunity to work with such a well-known composer like Elaine. So yeah, it was great. It was great to work with her and get to know her and everything.
It's fantastic. And what do you think it is, Laura, that's driving your interest in composition? Because I was struck by reading that in your biography.
But I don't know really. That's a really difficult question. I suppose it initially started with Emer Noon. Everyone probably knows Emer Noon here. And yeah, that's probably where it started. And then I suppose Erasmus was cancelled then. I do French, so I was meant to go on my Erasmus. And I think it was honestly kind of a blessing in disguise, because I was just saying to Aidan earlier actually that I think this is my favourite semester so far in college. So yeah, I'm really, really enjoying it. Yep.
Thank you. I'm really interested by the fact again that this idea of carving out a space for yourself seems to be coming to the fore of a lot of people's work among panelists today. So I look forward to talking to you more about that in just a few moments.
Perfect.
Thank you, Laura.
Thank you. Thank you.
And next up is Katie Feeney, also a third-year music student in NUI Galway. Katie won the Best Musical Direction at the All-Ireland Musical Theatre InterVarsities. She's experienced in vocal performance and choral conducting, and she's worked with drama students on musical theatre composition and ensemble performance. Katie, could you tell us a little bit about your work, please?
Yeah, thanks so much for having me as well. Yeah, I'm a third-year music student as well as Laura, and I would be mostly experienced in vocal performance, but once I got to college, I began the musical directing realm in musical theatre, and I realised how much I loved it. And then I got to work with Patrick Lonergan in the musical theatre module last year, and I loved that as well. And then I worked alongside Patrick Keneally from the drama department on his composition for musical theatre. And that was kind of my first insight into the world of editing, I suppose, because he wrote all of the music by ear, and then I dictated it and edited it to suit the chorus that I was working with. And then I didn't have any other experience in editing until this module, and it was really great. I'm so grateful it was offered here, because it's a really rare module to come by in undergraduate music studies. So it's an asset to the course, I think.
Excellent. That's wonderful, Katie. I'm really excited to talk to you about to you and Laura about that project in just a while, because I know that you have made it a fantastic achievement out of what you've constructed as a result of that project. And I'm really excited to talk to you about your work with Elaine Agnew. Thank you so much, Katie.
Thanks.
And now over to Anna Doyle, who is a final year student of drama, theatre and performance in NUI Galway. Anna has always had a keen interest in theatre, from starting youth-led theatre company Cult Theatre in Kilkenny in 2016 to devising feminist performance in New York in 2019. She enjoys absurdist and postmodern theatre and likes to write expressionistic pieces. Outside of theatre, she also writes for the online music zine Tontruale, reviewing and discussing contemporary music. So Anna, can you tell us a little bit about your role as artist?
absolutely. I suppose my art is very much based in theatre. I got into it when I was maybe 15, as a lot of teenagers do with youth theatre. And after that, I had to give it up for sixth year because the Leaving Cert has monopoly over everybody's lives when they're 18. So in sixth year, I realized that life wasn't particularly fun without making art. So I decided to set up cult theatre with a lot of my friends, and we just had fun with it. You know, we staged Reservoir Dogs by Quentin Tarantino, and it just definitely alleviated the stress of having to be in study all the time. And then when I got the opportunity to go to college, I realized that that's what I wanted to do full time. So yeah, I'm more based in writing now. I think that's where I want to go, but I'm also incredibly grateful for the theatre course in NUI because it gives you a taster of everything. Like, I've directed, I've written, there's a lot of critical and analytical thinking going on. So it's been really, really great.
Wonderful. And you know, that kind of that interdisciplinary nature of the work that you're doing, I think very much echoes the kind of things that Katie was talking about in terms of working with drama students on musical.
Absolutely.
So again, I'm really interested to tap into this in just a little while. But for now, thank you, Aoife. It's over to Anna. Anna Doyle, sorry. Thank you, Anna. And now it's over to Aoife.
We get it all the time.
Our final speaker today is Aoife Delaney-Reid, a final year student in drama, theatre and performance in NUI Galway, who works primarily as a theatre director and whose work is of a deeply rooted and inquisitive and collaborative nature. She's founded, along with Anna, and is co-artistic director of the theatre company War Theatre. So Aoife, can you tell us a little bit about what it is that you do, please?
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, as you just said, Frances, that I am co-artistic director of War Theatre in Galway. So the company was set up, I guess, as a way of exploring older texts, exploring new texts, and exploring the people who are interested in those texts. So we've done a lot of different shows. We've done a version of Wojciech, which was partially about kind of putting on, I guess, like a traditional performance of it, but then also interjecting it with, I guess, each performer's curiosities about the text. So kind of using text and performance in a sort of symbiotic way, you know, so that it's like we can understand more about the world through engaging with the text, but also learn more about ourselves through what comes up for us, even if it seems slightly, you know, more removed from the subject matter than you might originally suspect, I guess. And yeah, I guess I started off kind of similar to Anna in youth theatre, and figuring out that was something I quite liked and wanting to go down that route. And then I went over to Scotland for a bit to study in the Royal Conservatoire, and found that that approach didn't really suit me, and that I was more sort of interested in, I guess, trying to understand the history, trying to understand kind of the bits and pieces, I don't know, get kind of like a little bit of everything, and inform my approach that way rather than being too specific too early. And I think, yeah, coming to NUIG has really helped with that, like through getting to do bits of history, bits of performance, and sort of seeing how they meld. I feel like a lot more comes from that because you're stepping gently forward, and stepping sensitively, I guess, as opposed to charging forward too quick. Yeah.
So I want to talk to the two of you now, and we'll work our way backwards through the speakers that we've spoken to already. And I want to ask you a little bit about really the kinds of ways in which the university curriculum, you've touched on this already, Aoife, but you know, from that interdisciplinary perspective and the ability to engage with a variety of different things. But so often we tend to think, particularly when we're students, of assessment as a kind of an end point to our learning. And what's really been clear among the panelists is that assessment has been a kind of an opening up. It's given opportunities. So I'm really interested in how the curriculum has engaged you both as artists in terms of the projects that you've been involved in, how it's given you an opportunity to demonstrate some of the creative underpinnings of the works, you know, the kinds of thinking that brought you to where you are, but also how that assessment has perhaps opened things up further for you. So we think of those things as constraining in many ways, that assessment is an endpoint. And have you experienced this, or has it actually given you opportunity?
Absolutely. Well, I think like when you first come into college, you know, you're very much used to the secondary school structure of having to do work to meet a deadline for the sake of giving the work in, as opposed to for the sake of, you know, trying to explore something. And I think when you're in like a particularly open space, so my experience with the drama department has been of it being a very open space, wanting you to explore, that I think it sort of slowly changes your point of view on what assessment is, and it becomes a place of trying to engage and explore your own thoughts. And I feel like kind of as your outlook towards it slowly changes, you kind of realize that it's like, by engaging in study thoroughly, by looking at the stories of our like ancestors and what stories have been passed on, you kind of start to see like how, like, I don't know, I guess everything is so incredibly relevant, and it's like, well, you know, those stories are passed on for a reason, and then by having to write about that or create performances based on them, you can really start to find where they resonate for you, and sort of that sense of like the collective unconscious coming together in you, I guess. Yeah.
It's interesting that you spoke about each performer's curiosity in terms of the work you do, particularly as a director, each performer's curiosity in helping to construct the text. And I think, well, I'm wondering if you envisage your role as director as a kind of a pedagogic role as well, as a kind of a role that facilitates learning.
Yeah, I think it's mutual. I think maybe like as a director, you are initially opening up or trying to construct that space to facilitate both your own learning, the learning of others, and your sort of shared meeting. But I think as the process goes on, it's definitely much more, well, I think in the best of cases, you can kind of feel the space start to change by paying attention to sort of, I guess, the sensitivities of the interaction. But yeah, I think there is definitely an element of constructing a space that can facilitate learning. And then I guess if you look at what do we actually need to really learn, that it's, well, one, you know, interest, but also a space where we feel safe, or a space where it feels all right to question or all right to be wrong, because then that wrong can transform into what we really need to know or what we really need to ask.
Yeah, wonderful. Yeah, I think that you talked about shared meeting, and I think that's very true of assessment in general. Not just that meeting between people who have ideas, the meeting of the ideas as well, and all of the various ways in which discourses can take shape from each other through that assessment process. Anna, so can you talk to us about your project 448 Psychosis, and about some of the ways in which that arose?
Absolutely. So myself and Aoife were both cast in Westworks Theatre's version of 448 Psychosis. I think it was in April of 2018, I'm going to say, which was incredibly exciting for me, also probably for Aoife, but I always adored Sarah Kane. and sort of when the casting opened up, I sort of felt like, I don't know, it's very different from reading her scripts to actually being her script. So I was very, very excited to have the opportunity to experience both. And it was a very, you know, she has no stage directions. There aren't really any characters in it. So myself and Aoife were very much like knee deep in this very, very intense work, because it is very intense, you know, there's absolutely no denying that. But the experience of it, especially in first year, because it was like a professional production and neither of us had ever really done anything to that scale before, it definitely, for me, made me feel like my artistic actions had consequence, which I had never felt before, because, you know, you're doing Amdram for so long and you have no money, and you're really just like scraping things together, and you actually don't really care who sees it because you're so proud of it yourself, you know. But then you hit this level where you realize that people do care, and that, you know, there is enough money in it to be able to make something worthy, you know. So that was a really wonderful opportunity to realize that.
Thank you. And Aoife, you spoke about the kinds of ways in which critical thinking has developed around what it is that you do. Perhaps you could speak to me a little bit about the ways in which your practice has become embedded in that kind of critical thinking as a result of the work that you've done here at NUI Galway.
So could you say that question one more time?
Sure.
Sorry.
I'm thinking about the ways in which, you know, you spoke about critical theory and thinking critically about performance and directing. And I'm just wondering how that might have enhanced your work, or how that might have changed your work, how the learning that you've done here from that critical perspective has altered things for you.
Yeah, well, I guess in some ways it's sort of looking at how what you do is embedded in something much deeper and draws from something much deeper. And I guess that, like, if, like, you know, if critical thinking has emerged, it's come from something that sort of, you know, everyone can kind of agree on certain critical perspectives, or this makes sense, and it's like there's something of a coming together in that. And I think when you're trying to think critically in the work that you create, you're trying to, I suppose, be sensitive to the feelings that are in you relating to the work, in terms of, you know, a lot of the time if you see something on stage, you can kind of get a feeling of, oh, the actor seems slightly more in it, or even though everything is going exactly as it should, something feels off. And I feel like part of that is kind of, that's like the feeling of critical theory. Yeah, I guess maybe that's it, that it's like being at NUI and studying drama is like learning, like, you know, the linguistic side of critical theory is only one form of it, and it's really interesting to get to explore what that is in practice. And I guess that's kind of what comes up in the course, you know, that it's like the two, but by writing about what you're creating, and then also creating, seeing how those processes sort of meld or don't meld, and then relating that back to either the feeling you have or someone else's words who's thought about this topic a lot longer than you have, you know. Yeah.
So actually, you know, the subjective impressions, and then being able to break those down to see how things fit together. Anna, you're agreeing?
Yeah, I think so. I think Aoife has a much more like sensitive approach to these things, which is absolutely like fantastic. Whereas I'm more of a like, oh, I have to respect the lineage of practice in this, and then I'm sort of sometimes terrified to like do my own thing, because I don't know if it's like dramaturgically correct, you know, or if like Stanislavski would be happy that I was doing this. So it's like this fine balance between respecting the critics and feeling like you have enough information to go forward, but also trusting yourself and your own artistic vision.
And that gives us a perfect segue. Anna, thank you so much to you and Aoife. And I want to come back and talk to everybody as a group, because it's clear that there are themes emerging from this. But for now, thank you. And we'll go and talk to Katie and Laura. So Katie and Laura, you talked about your work with Elaine Agnew's Missa Brevis. Can you talk us through that, about what was involved in that editing and transcription project?
Yeah, so Elaine Agnew is an Irish composer, and she wrote this piece for a choir in 1991, and it had never been edited since then. So it was our job to analyze the piece in detail, like looking at every single bar, every single mark on the page, and questioning why it's there. And then I think the module is really good because it makes us utilize the skills we've built up throughout our years in college and our years as musicians in general, because we have to look at the score from not only the composer's point of view, which was very easy for us because we were lucky enough to be studying the work of a composer who is still alive, and we could talk to her regularly, like on a daily basis. We had great communication with her, but we also had to use our music history skills and our music theory skills in order to, you know, analyze the music more technically and realize why every single note is there. And the overall aim then is to create a score and an edition that is more performable and more legible and just reflects the composer's wishes more, which I think we achieved. And I think what Anna was saying about, you know, our artistic work having consequences is really interesting, because our work, you know, it not only taught us loads, but Elaine Agnew asked us to submit it to the Contemporary Music Centre then, which hopefully in turn will result in the piece being performed more regularly and the preservation of her music. And, you know, I think even though it was a form of assessment for us, I think the assessment wasn't the be all and end all for us. It lay somewhere in the middle. You know, I think it's really important to get the grade and know where we went wrong and where we can improve, but that only kickstarts another like journey on the piece and on the project, where we get to share it with the world in the Contemporary Music Centre, and hopefully work with Elaine again in the future, because she asked us to work with her on an opera she's working on as well when she comes to Galway. So it was really like, it opened up so many doors for us. It was great.
Incredible.
Yeah, just to add to what Katie said there as well, it was great to learn more about Irish composers, because, well, when we were studying, it seems like most Western art music was dominated by German, Italian, and French composers. So it was great to learn about Irish composers as well. I just think we're really lucky to have worked with Elaine so closely. I don't think it's a chance that everyone gets. So yeah, and as Katie said, like the assessment was in the middle. I think like it's still opening doors for us. So yeah, great.
And what's interesting about that is the way that, not only the way that it's opened things up for you in terms of it's led to these opportunities, it's led to certainly, I mean, these are accolades, but also thinking about how assessment can be integrative in that way, and how it can draw all of your skills and all of that knowledge acquisition together. I mean, did you feel that it was both an opportunity for you to show what you could do, as well as to engage in a kind of a deeper learning in that integrative sense?
Yeah, definitely. I think it was like, it kind of opened my eyes to being able to look at something musical from so many different perspectives that I have in my life. So like, as I said before, most of my musical experience would be from the performance side of things or conducting performers. And like that was a really important perspective to bring to the piece because it was a choral piece. And I was able to look at it through those eyes to see what a performer would see and make it more legible for the performer, but also to make sure that it reflects the rules of music theory, as well as Elaine's like hopes for the piece. And yeah, I think it was the first time I really realized that I was taking all my skills and pooling them all together for a project, and it's something that we're really proud of, like to have been able to do.
Fantastic. And Laura, do you think that this has perhaps shifted your own practice in some ways, or do you think it's deepened your own practice? Katie talks about, you know, that new kind of insight that's developed. How have things been for you as a result of engaging in that project?
I definitely agree with that. I suppose for me anyways, the thing that I thought was most important was, I mean, obviously working with Elaine, but seeing how she had like paved a way for herself and looking at her as such a successful composer and being like, okay, I might have something to aim towards now. And just good to you know, talk to her, and we have that contact as well for the future, you know, if we ever need advice or anything. So yeah, I definitely agree with that.
And so do you work together in other ways? You work on this project together. Have you anything in the pipeline?
Not as of now, but I'm sure in the future there'll be something. I don't think we're planning to go different ways anytime soon. I'd say we'll all be stuck in contact. Yeah. Not now, but I'm sure in the future at some point.
Perfect. So it's a kind of a lovely chance meeting that brought you into kind of a collaboration with each other that wasn't necessarily a collaboration that had already existed. So it gave you that opportunity as well.
Yeah, like, well, we were friends before anyways, but I definitely, well, like from the project point of view, I'd say we went from talking to each other maybe 3 times a week to probably every day. Yeah, so yeah.
So it's lots of opportunities coming out of this, certainly, which it's really exciting to keep an eye on that, and I look forward to watching it develop. Thank you so much, and I want to talk to you again about some of these ideas. But now we'll go over to Liz Quirk. Liz, I would like to talk to you about that kind of position that you have as somebody who's been a student, who's been through the assessment process, somebody who's now an active researcher and is working towards a scholarly production, somebody who's a practitioner. But I would like to talk to you about how they integrate, particularly in your role as teacher, as somebody who creates assessment, who constructs opportunities for learning for others.
Yeah, I think the sort of holistic sense of everything coming together means that like there's nothing that I'll ask of students that I wouldn't do myself. So when I first started teaching on the Masters in Writing, that poetry module, what I was doing was every week I'd give out homework, but I'd also do the homework myself so that I'd be able to come back in the following week and go, okay, we have to write a prose poem. That was a complete dose. This is how I managed it. You know what I mean? It was just about kind of understanding process and maybe having my eyes open just in that specific moment to what the students were doing. I'm not saying I do that. Like I've been doing that this year, but I try and like when I'm working as a teacher, I'm there primarily as a writer. You know what I mean? And it's just I've been given such freedom in what I teach that it's very self-indulgent and very enjoyable. So I like I'm a massive fangirl for the stuff that I teach. So when I'm there with the students, it's it like I can, like I taught this morning, I was teaching a couple of collections by the poet Leanne O'Sullivan, which I think are magical. So there was a lot of like, you know, in the Zoom windows, just like, you know, very much punctuating parts of the poem and like honing in on the language. I think I've come to academia from a very practical place, and in terms of assessment, I think the industries that I worked in before coming to academia have helped in how I like create the courses. What's very interesting as well, because I entered the structured PhD program, I entered on a traditional PhD, and then I kind of whinged for about 6 months and they let me do creative practice, because I kept asking, is there anyone can I write some poems? Can I write some poems now? Can I write some poems now? And that went on for about 6 months until they were finally like, yeah, you can write some poems. But what I did when I started the PhD was I actually took the module that I'm teaching as for credit, for 5 credits. So I took that MA in writing first poetry module, kind of saw how it worked, saw what it was like to sit in it. And then 2 years later, I think 2 years later, I started teaching it. And I teach the second semester as well now. So it's been very metaphorical to move from down in the body of the class to up to the front of the class. Like there's a distinct sort of pivot in your perspective. What I want as well for the students when they have, like what they're working towards for the assessment, this particular module is kind of building on the first semester. So in the first semester, I want them to enjoy language and find their voice. And if they can, if they come out of it with good poems or poems that are going in the direction of being good poems, that's perfect. It's just that idea of poems being created, that they're actual things that are made, that are crafted, and that they're not precious, that you can set fire to them and rebuild another one out of the ashes of that. But for the second semester, I think because of the other industries I worked in, the assessment that I've created for them is, like I worked in TV and film for about 6 years before I went back to do PhD. And everyone in that realm has a show reel, right? So you need something in your hand, Maria, to go into interviews or to pitch to people or whatever. So I thought, okay, students, if we work in the second semester so that everyone leaves at the end of it with a pamphlet, like a narrative linked, threaded body of work, 15 poems, and that they've thought of everything from the order of the poems, the composition of the poems, how they speak to each other, the way they channel their voice, and then that has their name on it and it's concrete, so they'll have that in their hands. So it's like, oh, you studied poetry in college, what was that? And it's like, well, I made this, and having that actual physical artifact, I think, is massive, especially for like when like a writer, you always want that something with your name on it. I came from byline culture. I was a journalist for a long time. And that idea of seeing your name in print, it matters, and what it does as well is it raises the stakes for the work you're creating, I think.
Do you think that there's a possible danger in that? I mean, you talk about raising the stakes of the work that you're creating. How do you avoid, because, you talk about how these things that you want the students to realize that the things that they're creating are not precious.
Yeah.
How do you uncouple that from the fact that they're being assessed on it?
I suppose what it is, it's a very, like, we're writing constantly. So they're constantly drafting, and they do peer review critique sessions as well. So I run the workshop in that there's sort of like a lecture-esque part, and then there's a peer review session. So everyone gets to submit, say, twice a semester, up to 6 poems each time. So they'll have 12 poems peer reviewed by their peers, by me. And then it's kind of like a dump of information and suggestions, and they can just take what they want and disregard what they don't want. And it's about them opening up their own sensibility to the idea that something, can be reshaped or remade. Like it does it in the first semester. That's probably the biggest thing that I'm trying to teach, the idea of you can break and remake and go back to the first draft after 12 others. You know what I mean? Like that it's a dynamic process, because poetry, God help us, it's not the sexiest of arts. You know what I mean? It's very static. I don't know, like when people have been introduced to people and they ask me what I do and I say I'm a poet, there's an oh Jesus effect. There's like a sapping of energy out of the room. So it's just that to put that dynamism into it, to give it that life. And I suppose as well, it's a culture, like I'm very, very clear with everybody, that we all have this culture of respect, that it has to be, our subjects aren't up for discussion. Our subjects are our subjects, our themes are our themes. But the ways in which we approach these things, like if there's a wonky simile, you know, that we're open to discussing that kind of thing. Or like the hierarchy in a poem I talk about an awful lot, just helping somebody like reorder something or to apply a certain lens, sort of moving the camera sometimes in the poems. But I think what it is, they're encouraged to do so much of that reviewing that it becomes just part of the process. So then they become less precious about their work. You know, like I like the class that I taught last year's MAs, they're still meeting in a peer review poetry group once a week as a bulk, like, and they're still following the format. And I got an email off one of them last week saying they want to put out an anthology, and what did I think of that? And I just think that's really cool. You know, it's a process, like, and it just builds and builds, and hopefully there'll be lots of little like pods springing out of these of not really in a Dead Poet Society way, you know, captain my captain, but like just that it's a live living art, you know, that it's something, it's not just something that sits on a shelf and dies a death, or hides under the mattress. So yeah, it's just, I suppose, getting rid of that idea of being precious is by engagement. You can't be precious when you're pulling something apart and then putting it back together. You know, you can admire beauty, but then you've got to get stuck into it as well.
And I suppose that's an important part of the process as well for anybody. And actually, let's go back and talk to everybody together, because I'm interested to hear about other people's ideas about this. But I'd be interested in hearing from you all about the ways in which that assessment, that you can detach yourself from the product, from what you're producing in assessment, and whether that's something that's necessary. So if we can have Anna and Aoife and Katie and Laura back, I'd be really interested to talk to them, with Liz as well, about this, about whether it's possible or whether it's desirable to actually, when work is so much when your creative work is so much a part of who you are, and it's been with you for such a long time, when you're being assessed on that, what is it like, and what matters in terms of how you approach that assessment?
I think for us, we definitely have the benefit of, so whenever we have our assessments, we also have critical reflections to go with them, because there's always that fear that somebody might not get it. And when you're, being graded on it, you like really want people to get it. So yeah, we usually tend to have like critical assessments to sort of explain our work and to delve into like a self-critical process, and like it's fine if people don't get it, because failure is data. So yeah, like it is a little terrifying to, especially with your lecturers who you absolutely look up to and who know their stuff and who like 100% you feel like know better than you. So it is a little terrifying, but I would say the critical assessment definitely helps in that.
Yeah.
And I guess, yeah, following on from that as well, I think with assessment, sometimes the scariest but also the best thing about it is that like 90% of the time I feel like, if you get something that's maybe lower than you expected, or if you did like exceptionally well, I feel like you kind of know that before you submit something. So you can submit something, maybe you make something sort of like last minute-ish and you get a poor grade. The worst thing about that is going, oh well, I know that is accurate, or you kind of have that feeling inside beforehand. But also I think that's incredibly helpful as well, because I think, it's kind of easier to sort of trick yourself and go, oh no, that was really good, or, oh no, maybe they didn't get it. But I think when you're, yeah, like Anna was saying, when you're forced to sit down and write the critical reflection, as you're writing, you're kind of going, oh, either I have no idea what I'm on about, or you go, oh, so this is exactly what was happening in that piece. Oh, and that's why it works. I think it's, it's a reflection on your work, but also it's completely you reflecting yourself back with both your failures and successes, I guess.
And Liz, that's a very strong part of presumably what you do as well. You're on the other side of this too, in that you're writing poetry. You asked to write this as part of your PhD. So part of that assessment process for you involves, writing your own work and having that be presented and assessed. And do you Do you find that challenging? Do you find it less challenging because of the work that you've done in teaching? Would you find it more challenging?
I find it terrifying, to be honest. It's like someone's put a load of ham in my pocket and thrown me to the lions, you know. Especially with like the way my PhD is made is that there's going to be 2 collections of poetry in it. One of them's out, done and dusted, published, grand reviews, lovely job. I can see the flaws with it now, but I think it's, you know, my juvenilia 3 years ago, I was still 33. Do you know what I mean? But the second collection now is my difficult second album, and it's experimental and it's very representative, and it's kind of like, I've said this before and I probably should never say it again, but I always feel like it's like putting your underwear on the line and asking people to go over and look at it. You know what I mean? It's like, do you want to see my deepest, darkest thoughts, my soul, my guts? You know, and I feel I'm kind of like, I'm in the last throes of it now. I'd say 6 months left, and I have the fear, like the chronic fear of what the Viva will be like. You know, I have this sort of gladiatorial thing where I'm going to just be facing the dragons, you know. But it's, I suppose then I know that like it's only poetry at the end of the day. Obviously it's the blood in my veins and it's my beating heart, but at the same time, if someone isn't into it or they don't get it, or there are questions asked about it that I can't answer, like, it's okay too. And I think that's one of the things that I've learned through the course of the PhD. I kind of had to, I don't know, put a different lens over things a little bit. Like, it's very serious. I don't want to put out a desperate book. You know what I mean? I don't want the second book to be like, oh, first book was great, second book, big stinker. But at the same time, I have to trust what I wrote. Like, I've made this and I'm proud of it. And I think it's savage. You know what I mean? And that should be enough for me at the same time. But we'll see. With like, when I'm coming up to the Viva, who knows? I'll probably end up bald from pulling all my hair out or whatever. But there's many different facets, I think, with the teaching and the actual research and the writing and all of it, and it all just comes together in one strange kind of a meld.
Do you find it complements, the bits complement each other, or do you find that there's tension between them?
I find that I write less poetry now than I ever did. So when I do come to write, it's like it's made. I have to do a lot less drafting. So my practice has become more streamlined, better. I'm a better poet. I'm definitely a better, God help us, academic, because this isn't my natural habitat, you know. And then from what I'm teaching, it's kind of, what I teach is very much what I'm interested in. So that all feeds into the process as well. Conversations that I have with students will help my practice. Do you know what I mean? Like today I taught a lecture, I think I called it something about myth, narrative, and how to describe ditches was the name, was what I taught today. You know, because I think if you can zoom in on those aspects of poetry, describing a ditch, you know, describe a ditch, give me a ditch, write that in poetry and show it to me on the page. You know, those are those remarkable little skills that are transferable. So I suppose it's an amount of practicing what I preach as well.
Yeah. Interesting points there about reflection and practice, and the nature in which those things are integrated in terms of your own work. But Katie and Laura, I mean, what is it like doing this with someone else's work?
You go, Katie.
Yeah, it was really interesting. I mean, we were lucky because Elaine was really open to our ideas as well. But I think, you know, it was a big project to take on because, as I said, it was written in 1991 when she was a postgraduate student in the Royal Scottish Academy of Music and Drama, and she said herself, you know, that there were many mistakes that she made there at that age because she was an inexperienced composer. So, like that, it was really interesting for us to get an insight into the life of an experienced composer and an inexperienced composer by looking at her score and seeing, oh, this is what a postgraduate composition student wrote. And now this is what the same person as an experienced composer wanted it to be. And kind of seeing how that all grew together and relating that to our own lives as musicians and trying to build a career in music. It was really, really valuable, yeah.
I'd say as well, I don't think we thought it at the time, but it was probably a really daunting task. I mean, like, we got Elaine's original copy, and we were kind of expected to turn it into this like glamorous, clean sheet that anyone could read. So I definitely say it was probably daunting. But yeah.
But it's interesting to hear you talk about the dynamism of that process. That even though it's daunting, even though here you have somebody else's work, you're recognizing that Elaine is both postgraduate student writing it and an experienced composer. In the same way Liz talks about poetry needing to be rewritten, and in the same way as Anna talks about, that critical reflection on what you do. So it seems that there's some kind of consensus that the object of assessment isn't set in stone in the way we might think of assessment traditionally as having this final product that's then submitted and never considered again. That your experience of it has been something very different, where it's dynamic and it comes to life, and it sort of invigorates itself, as well as, from what I'm hearing, invigorating your own practice. So talk to me a little bit about that. How has this assessment work shaped what it is you do, whether like Liz, you're on either side of the assessment process, or whether as a student you're the one being assessed? Talk to me about how those things are coming together because we've talked a lot about identity today. Liz talked about kind of carving out a space for your own voice, or where to insert yourself in the tradition. We've talked about how Katie and Laura had really their first experience with editing through this assessment process. We've talked about how Aoife and Anna already had experience in doing these things, but now they're doing them in a different way. So have you found that the assessment process has changed your practice at all, beyond that reflection and that reconstruction of what it is that you're doing? Do you do things differently, and if so, what?
Absolutely, yeah. I'd say like probably one of the strongest things that I've absorbed from it is like the importance of writing and like what it can show you in yourself. That I think maybe like before coming into college, I would have always considered, the doing of the project as the primary thing, and then writing as sort of like a thing for the archives, or something that kind of like almost already belonged to the past. But I feel like from having to reflect on both the work of others and my own work, like I feel like you just learn what a valuable tool writing is, because it's like, well, one, you have the document of what you've done, but then also it's like, in order to be able to write something, you need to understand what you've done. And if you're truly conveying something, if you truly want to convey something through words, where you don't have your body, you don't have your tone, you need to really pick the right words. And then there's a sort of I think there's a lot more goes into writing than I would have initially thought. And I remember after Wojciech, which was one of the shows Anna and I did, the lecturer Catherine Morris came to see it, and I was talking to her afterwards, asking for feedback, and she was like, write about what it was like to make that, and you'll learn so much. And kind of at the time I was going, yeah, sure. But now, like, I'm actually, in the last couple of days, I've started to like rewrite about it and find out so much about the process. And I think sometimes kind of, if you're not in a structure that's requiring you to do that, you can just dismiss it much, I guess, much easier than it should be dismissed, because it's like, well, what are the things we remember? The things that are written down. If you look at the Bible, any religious text, anything that's lasted a long time, it's like it's written with purpose. And I think that's kind of what we're learning to do, to write authentically.
So do you see that writing as part of the process, or do you see it as detached from it?
I think when there is the best product and the best written piece, then it is part of the process. I think that it's like, for those two sides to be integrated, requires like an awareness of what the process is in the external world, but also what that is in the internal world. And I think when you're disconnected from one or the other, I think that either comes across in either the finished product, where you go, something kind of feels a bit off, but you can't quite articulate it, or afterwards everyone goes, oh, that was great, but there wasn't that, that oomph to it. And I think the same in writing, that if it's not integrated and a holistic part, then you can kind of feel that sort of something's just kind of just lacking a bit, even if all the words are right.
So it's kind of giving you the vocabulary and the lens really through which to view all of that you're creating and that you're making. It gives you're saying, from what I'm hearing anyways, that it gives you a certain amount of objectivity that allows you to stand back from what you've created and to assess that.
Absolutely, yeah, absolutely.
And what about everybody else? What are your thoughts on whether assessment has shaped your practice, whether it's given you something different, or whether it's changed the way you do things?
I think, I do think it's important to an extent, definitely, especially in music, when there are so many rules. But I also think it's kind of a launch pad of sorts, like to kind of unlock your creativity side of things, which is really important in all forms of art, whether it's drama, poetry, or music. And I do think it's so important to have that baseline of knowledge that assessment can only improve on. And it is a growing thing. It's always growing. And, I think our project really highlighted that, in that, like, our assessment of Elaine Nagi's piece unlocked something else in her, and she realized things that she did wrong. And like, she'll bring that to her next composition, but we'll bring that to our musical careers, and it'll help our creativity as well as our like music knowledge, more like in the rules side of things, if you know what I mean.
Very interesting. So I think we have time for some questions. So if anybody has questions, we can now start typing them in the chat box. There's actually already one there. And this is for Liz. Thanks to all the panelists for so many interesting, I've skipped one. Sorry, Liz, do you find that when students come initially from the second level education system, that they have to be almost deconstructed and reformed after the almost spoon feeding by the system in preparation for the Leaving Cert? So that's a question for Liz. And then a question for Laura, Katie, Aoife and Anna to follow that. This is also from Mairead. Were you ready for the freedom of critical thinking after the very structured education you would have been given due to the pressure of conforming to the Leaving Cert curriculum? So Liz, we'll go to you first of all. Do you find that you have to reshape the students having come from that Leaving Cert education process in terms of the way they learn?
Well, I was teaching on the English course I did 2 first-year cohorts. So I had about 60 first years for 2 years. And I found it was there was a difference between passive learning and active learning. And you'd nearly have to, like, my classroom had to be a very sort of performative space. You know what I mean? And it was trying to activate like the learning. And, I suppose it encouraged me as well, like to try and engage with them in an actual, like, in a personal way about the material that we were studying, because there was an amount of people sitting there, on the desk with the heads on the hands, and like, I'm a big fan of sort of challenging that and making them sort of invest in what we're doing as well. Like, I always try to find it's my job to find the most interesting angle on a subject, but I think then it's the student's job to sort of also be interested in their own angles. So yeah, there's an amount of sort of waking up, I think, and encouraging active learning rather than just that passive assimilation of knowledge, and it was easy on the English course because you could, like, we were studying some such disparate things like drama texts and novels and poems, and like, one of the most fun things I could do in a class is bring in a piece of bad writing and just present it to the students and then go, isn't that shocking? And then they're like, oh my God, we're allowed to say that this is bad. And I'm like, I invite you in the most colorful ways you can think of to tell me how bad this is, you know. And then they start like going, okay, so we can actually engage with the text. And yeah, it's just a different way of thinking, I suppose. It's fun though, once they start waking up, and then you want them to go back to sleep again. You're like, push now.
To you, Laura, Katie, Eva, and Anna, were you ready for that same kind of critical thinking after the sort of the structure of the Leaving Cert and the pressure to work to a very kind of conformative sort of method?
Yeah, it's definitely a shock, and I think for me, like, I just really didn't like secondary school and just the education system in general, because, like, oh my god, it's just so much study for like a single day, and it's just, I think it's ridiculous. But anyway, I think with coming in, I think it's slightly unfair, not to like lay blame, but I think the secondary school Leaving Cert system definitely, it just erases all joy in creativity, like the English syllabus, which was like, I always knew I wanted to study English, so you know, that was like the main thing I was interested in, but you like rote learn how to be creative, and that's just so insulting. So it's definitely a shock coming in, and it's really wonderful to get it back, but I think it's definitely a shame that you know, you have to lose it to get it back. But I think it's very interesting, because with drama, like, you're on your feet a lot, and I feel like maybe the first like 2 or 3 months of drama, like, you could definitely tell the students who had taken a year out after the Leaving Cert versus the people who had come straight from the Leaving Cert, you know, because I feel like there was a lot more, like Liz was saying, like, a lot more people were more subdued, like, you know, everything, like every move you made was going to be criticized in some way, or like critiqued even. So I always found that very funny. That the people who had taken a year out were more open, you know, because they were allowed to be.
Any further thoughts on that from your experiences?
I really agree with Aoife and Anna. I do think it is quite a shock going straight into college, and I think you are very much spoon-fed in secondary school and in the Leaving Cert. But I think as the degree goes on and as your college life goes on, I think you do adapt to it. Maybe at the start you're like, well, personally I was like, I don't really like college that much, but when I got into second semester first year, I realized I loved it, and I do never want to go back to school again. So I think you definitely gain a lot of independence. And even in terms of, as the degree progresses, you can decide which route you like to take. Like certain modules, you mightn't like some, you might like others, and you can just choose which direction you like to go in. So I think that is also really good.
I suppose there's that thing of, you know, you have to learn the rules before you can break them, or at least bend them. And I suppose that's what the secondary system imparts. You know, it gives you the foundation knowledge for the things that you might build on later in the future, that you all seem certainly to have built on in really remarkable ways. I'm terribly impressed by just the diversity of what you're doing, and how you found your own identity in this, and how you brought your identity to it as well. We have a question here from Patrick. Thanks to all the panelists for so many interesting ideas and observations. During the last few weeks, a lot of the academic contributors have talked about how their students have suggested ideas about what should be taught in the curriculum. How would the panelists feel about the idea of students being asked to contribute to regular curriculum conferences where they talk about what they'd like to see being taught? I know a lot of lecturers worry that this might come across as being like a pilot coming out from the cockpit and asking for advice about how to fly the plane, but it seems like something that works very well. And what are the gaps in the curriculum that you've noticed?
Well, I guess in terms of like students contributing to the curriculum, I think it all depends on how that space is navigated. Because like I think even just thinking back to, I guess, maybe the way in which I engaged in first year. Yeah, I think everyone has a bit of an ego coming in first year, you know, even second year. It takes a while to break down an ego. And I think, you know, you can kind of go, oh, this thing isn't relevant, or this thing isn't. And then you kind of sit with it for long and you realize, oh, okay, this completely is relevant. So I feel like it's sort of the answer to the question lies somewhere between how do you actually gauge as a student when is the right time to contribute, and how as a lecturer or a person who facilitates space do you gauge when is the right time for students to contribute. So like I don't know, I guess that's like a very like specific like alleyway of space for that to work in. But I guess as well, yeah, I think there's never harm in opening the space for that discussion to begin. And I think even if it is, you know, like taking in feedback, like I know like the drama department, and I'm sure most departments do like the feedback forums at the end. But I feel like maybe like final year students when they go or something, that could be like people who've reached the end of like that part of their education, that I think reflecting back is much more helpful than or maybe much more insightful than when you're in the process of it, because it's like there's so much, you know, happening in your head, both in terms of like navigating that space as like a newly formed or reformed individual, and then, you know, as a student. And yeah,
absolutely. Because I guess you don't know what you don't know, right?
Yeah.
So it's difficult to add something when you don't know if the thing you're adding has any substance to it.
What do you think? Are there further thoughts? I mean, have you noticed any gaps that you think perhaps now that you're more experienced, more knowledgeable, that you you know, you'd like to address? Or
I was just thinking, it's interesting from mine and Laura's point of view, because we're the first year of our course. We're the first music students in NUIG. So I think we've been quite lucky in that we've been very listened to by the people running our course and all of our lecturers, because we're kind of all navigating it together with them. And I feel really lucky to have been able to do that. And I do think that that should be something that's offered in every course, whether it's been there since the beginning or whether it's brand new, because I do think there is, you know, there should be levels to it. You know, I don't think, as Aoife said, a first year student is going to know exactly what they need to know, but you still know what you want to know, and everyone knows what path they want to go down very generally. Like it might be very blurred, but you know kind of an idea usually. So I do think it's really important to have your say as well, because once you come from the Leaving Cert, which absolutely suppresses creativity, especially in music, the music course for the Leaving Cert, there's no creativity in it at all. It's all learn it off by heart. That's it. I think it's really exciting, and I was raring to go, like when I came into college in first year, ready to compose the new Mozart symphony, like, which I think I was. But I think it's really important, yeah, to finally have your say in the things you love doing.
Liz, what's your perspective on that in terms of student engagement in the curriculum as a teacher?
Well, I'm very much in favor of students presenting things that they think that they've come across that they think is mind-blowing. You know, I'm very much like, okay, if you find something that you think, you know, will float the boats of everybody else, bring it in. Absolutely. I try like when I started the gig teaching on the MA in writing, I was given, like I said to John Kenny at the time, can I teach what I want? And he said yes. And I said, that's not probably going to be very orthodox. You know what I mean? We're going to have, it's not going to be like the canon or the Owl Boys, you know what I mean? We're not going to be studying the Wasteland. And I was given permission to kind of do that. And then between this year and last year, it's just been about like letting the students' interests direct the way that the courses go. So like in the first semester, when I kind of get a feel of the student voices or where their subjects are, I can kind of mold things in that direction. And then because I'm taking a lot of the students from the first semester into the second semester, I can do this really nifty sleight of hand where I crowbar in all their interests into sort of, it's sort of a living curriculum, I suppose. So say now I had a lecture planned for maybe the third last week, and then I said it to the students, I'd really like to teach you this instead, and this is what this book is made of. And they're like, yeah, go for it, you know what I mean? So if there are, like, I like to give out a book list early, and then like you'll see the things that will fall flat, but every week, like I have a feeling like with the students, because we're touching on different voices, like different traditions, you know, where like I'm challenging them in like there's a lot of stuff about race on the course, and there are a lot of non-binary poets writing. So what, like, it's a lot of sort of things where they have to engage with identity, and then it's just letting them experience the sort of whiplash effect of all these things, and then coming back towards me if they find things that fit in. And I'm kind of sort of open to that, you know. I like, you know, I'd like them to enjoy what I'm teaching, but as well I like surprising them too. You know, I like presenting stuff they've never heard of before. You know, I like kind of showing them these magical things. You know, there's like a collection of poetry that I really like teaching is Stephen Sexton's If All the World and Love Were Young, which is a collection of poems written in the world of Super Mario 3 to be specific. And it's a collection of poems that he wrote in relation to the innocent death of his mother through the prism of Super Mario, which was a game he was obsessed with at that time. So the landscape is mad, and there's like, you can have a pink sky. It's kind of, you know, I like to show them things where the rules don't necessarily apply. Like, we all know how to write a sonnet, but how do you break a sonnet and kind of remake a sonnet, you know? So yeah, it's a bit Wild West, I suppose, in my classroom, for want of a better phrase.
And I think that's important because, you know, you're talking there about interest and you're talking there about identity, and the idea of the canon in relation to this is a complicated one, because traditionally how we've taught the canon has not embraced really either of those things particularly well, or how we've conceptualized the canon. So, and this leads us on to a question that Kira has asked, which is, first of all, Kira thanks the panel for fascinating insights and generosity in sharing those experiences. And she says, I'd love to know the perspective of all 5 speakers in terms of flexibility of the learning experience. How important is flexibility in terms of risk-taking, collaboration, and creativity to your learning, or indeed teaching experience? Do you think there's enough flexibility in your experience of learning at NUI Galway? I find I'm thinking more flexibly now in my teaching because of the current circumstances, and would love to know your thoughts.
I think there is enough flexibility, but I think it comes back to what Aoife was saying. I think it was Aoife who was saying that you don't really know what you need to know, and I think you need to have a certain amount of knowledge before you can be creative, if that makes sense. Yeah.
We tend to think of those two things as very kind of different but related. You know, we think that there is knowledge and that is fact and that is truth, and then there's creativity, which is taking that and doing something else with it. But there is a sort of interdependence. Anna, you're nodding.
Yeah, I guess just in terms of in drama specifically, like anything you want to create has to make like dramaturgical sense, and by that I mean, like, unless it's like a Dadaist piece or something, there has to be a reason for everything you're doing. And I feel like sometimes, especially because I feel like our curriculum is quite like, it's quite like politically centered, you know, because of, you know, just like it's art, you know, it is political. But I think sometimes I feel the need, and I'm sure other people in the class do as well, to make something in response to, I don't know, an event or a political happening. And sometimes it doesn't necessarily make sense because of your identity, I guess, you know, and sometimes it feels difficult taking up space in a conversation like that and trying to make art in response to things that are happening in the world that, you know, of course we should be interested in, but how do you make a performance piece in response to the Black Lives Matter protest without noticeably taking up space as a privileged white woman, you know? So I think there's definitely flexibility in, you know, our professors being like, you know, I don't know if this is a good idea, or have you thought this through? Like, do you have to be totally naked for this performance, or is that just like for the theatrics, or is there a reason you're doing this, you know? So I think there definitely is flexibility, and sometimes I feel like it might be good for us as students to do those things, to do those wrong performances in order to understand why they're wrong, you know, rather than just thinking it or talking it through in a critical way, to actually embody it and then feel why it's wrong and know from that.
And again, we come back to the idea of that interplay or that interchange between creativity and critical reflection on the creative process. And I suppose that works in both directions as well. You know, it's not just that you create and then you reflect, but you reflect, and out of that you can create. Would you agree or disagree?
Yeah, I think they're definitely, like, I don't think you can have one without the other. And they need each other, like they need the symbiosis to survive. But like the critical reflection isn't just, you know, writing like a 2,000 word essay and submitting it. It should be like a constant thing. And I think just going back to the flexibility, like unless you're allowed to do that, and unless you're allowed to make big, wide, loud mistakes, then sometimes it's difficult to do that constant critical reflection, you know? Yeah.
Liz, you want to come in there?
Yeah, I was just actually thinking, sure, my experience of being a student in the English department has been the most flexible thing. They've pretty much, I've been supported and allowed to do pretty much more or less whatever I want creatively. And there's huge amounts of support. I could suggest nearly any poetic form and stand on my head, and the department would be like, yeah, see how that goes. You know what I mean? It's been a very supportive environment to create work in. And also, I don't know if any other place would have let me try this. Like, I'm the first creative practice poetry student. I have nothing to lose. You know what I mean? And the department has nothing to lose either, in encouraging me. But through that flexibility and the sort of that space, to move between the standard sort of pedagogical PhD research into this sort of hybrid creative monster, it's been like, I was just thinking as everyone was speaking there, that I've actually gotten away with murder. You know what I mean? The learning experience has been, and it's been crucial to my development as a writer, because I've had all of this sort of corralled space. You know, I've been given this safe place, and people, you know, like I was telling a friend there yesterday that you know, people will gauge how much I love them by how I don't ask them to read my PhD. You know, like people are actually interested in reading my work in draft form over and over again. That's huge. Like my girlfriend won't read my PhD. I know that. You know what I mean? Like, it's just it's I suppose what it is with the English department specifically, because that's my experience, you know, the only one I've had experience of, that it's just very supportive of the work and the attempt to make work, and in the research as well. Like, I never feel, if I don't know something and someone suggests to me, oh, have you read this? It always feels like helping, and not someone kind of going, well, she hasn't read that tome of brilliance, you know? It's been like, talk to me in 6 months, but so far it's been absolutely fabulous.
Thank you. And Laura, Katie spoke about, you know, that idea of coming in wanting to be the next Mozart. And I know that you have a huge interest in composition at the moment. And how are you managing that? Both in terms of the sort of the almost sort of precise nature of the rules that you're learning about music, but also that experimental play that comes along with creativity. Not that it's, you know, wholly untrammeled by rules, but that sort of fusing those two elements of the creative process together, the fact that there are these rules, and the fact that, you know, you want to craft something that brings your own identity and your own experiences to bear on it.
I'd pretty much agree with what Liz was saying. I can't think of one time where anyone has discouraged what I wanted to do. Especially this semester, with the composition portfolio, we have a new lecturer, Dr. Amanda Fury, and she's great. She's definitely changed my ear, I think, in what kind of compositions I'd like to compose, I guess you could say. But like, this is just an example. I remember I said to her, Amanda, I don't have a clue what key I've done this piece in. And she was like, it's absolutely fine. It doesn't need a key. You can do it in whatever you want, you know? So I just think it's great how encouraging the environment is. Can really do whatever you want. I mean, to a certain extent, obviously, but yeah.
I could talk to you all day about this, and you know, I'm really interested in just the ways that you've approached this, the kinds of academic rigor you're all bringing to the process, but the fact that it's not doing anything other than seemingly deepening the interests that you've already had and that engagement with your subjects. And you're all nodding at me. So, well, we've one more question from Mairead, which is, do you get to do work placement or workshops in primary or second level schools to start to waken up that imagination a little bit earlier? And I'm going to add on to that, and I'm just going to ask a question for each of the panelists. How could we be encouraging the same kinds of depth of learning through the creative process at a younger age?
I think both my parents are primary school teachers, so I feel very passionately about the education system in Ireland. So I think even just the presence of a care, or artistic care specifically, is something that really needs to be imbued in primary schools, because, you know, you have this one teacher who teaches you all of the subjects, and it is probably very likely that they have a bias in one subject, and usually that bias is not in art, and for that reason it gets pushed the wayside. So I think, I mean, I don't have any answers, but I think the presence of art in primary schools to begin with is very important. And even just, you know, not necessarily, you know, I'm not asking for like drama workshops every second day, but I think even in terms of like visual art, like children are so, they're so malleable, you know, and I think it's so important to introduce like that wrongness that I was talking about already, like even if you draw a stick man, like I sit and wonder at my mother's second year or second class students who like draw stick men and then like color them outside the lines. I'm like, oh my God, that is fantastic, you know? So I think it's very much just like a perspective that needs to be changed in primary schools, I would say.
Okay, thank you.
I did this just when I was starting the PhD. I got involved in this thing called the Teacher and Artist Partnership. So I ended up working with a load of primary school teachers for a week with some other artists, a theatre director, a visual artist, someone who made paper mache monsters. It was mad. It was a mad week. And then we each got to do a 20-hour residency in a primary school. And I ended up with 5th and 6th class pupils teaching in a small, tiny school in North Galway, teaching them how to tell stories. But it was kind of, I nearly went in like an anarchist. You know, like the teacher thought I was going in to like sort out grammar and all this. And I was like, forget grammar, it's post language now and all this. But even with my own daughters, my youngest daughter, she's 5 tomorrow and she's in junior infants. and she got given out to because what was it, a tree or something? She didn't use the colors brown and green. Well, I says to my daughter, I says, this is a moment where we're going to speak some truth to power. I was like, this is a teachable moment. So like we got into this big thing anyway, but it's about broadening those horizons. So like from my perspective, I'm trying to raise little anarchists, you know, to go into the system and try to change things from the inside. And then if I actually, as part of my penance for whatever sins I've had in the past life, I actually run a Montessori school, right? This is the weirdest thing that I do. Like I came down to Kerry because lockdown, ended up having to take over my mom's Montessori school, whole thing. But like the little kids that are coming in there, they are going to be leaving as these little autonomous beings, you know? So that's, I mean, from my perspective, it's about tackling the system when you can get access to the system. Which probably sounds a bit more threatening than I mean it to. But yeah, it's about getting inside and then invading everything and, you know, creating change.
Blue trees and pink skies.
Yeah, I was like, is this one for real with her tree colors? I was like, has no one ever heard of autumn? Like, it's a whole thing. Anyway.
What about you, Katie?
Yeah, that's really interesting. And I think I noticed that like in secondary school and primary school, probably primary school more so, the arts are seen as more of an extracurricular activity all the time. It's a hobby, you know, writing poetry is a hobby and singing is a hobby, you know, and that's great. It is a hobby for so many people, but you know, so could doing maths. Like someone could love doing maths in their spare time, but be, I don't know, a lawyer or something. Like that's fine too. So I think it kind of strips away a little bit of respect for the subjects from a child's view. And that's already starting off on the wrong note. Like, and that needs to be changed. It needs to be more structured, I think, in primary school, but less structured in secondary school, because the creativity needs to be opened up for the secondary school student. And I think, you know, especially fifth and sixth year students can really manage more independence than what they're given in the subjects, and to open up their creativity before they go to college, because then when they get to college, it won't be this big slap in the face, like, oh my God. And I think that's why so many people who do arts in college kind of in first year are like, I don't think this is for me. This is so like, I'm not being told what to do, what's going on. But like, you're not supposed to be told what to do. You're supposed to be creative. And I think that could be taught so much better before we get to that stage of freaking out about it.
You brought me back to a horrible memory of my own experience in primary school, Katie, when I used to be given colouring in to do as a reward for finishing my maths earlier. And it put me off both colouring in and maths because they were pitting them against each other. And, you know, I loved them both when I was 4 or 5. So yeah, but certainly we need to think about how we teach these things and how we conceptualize them as well. You know, I mean, clearly it's both are different kinds of rigorous knowledge, and both are different kinds of different ways of exploring the world. So yeah. And Laura?
I was just thinking back to my own experiences in school while you were saying that. And I don't think, like, I haven't really thought about it before, which is funny. But I think in primary school, it was usually just, I mean, the typical get ready for St. Patrick's Day, play the tin whistle, whatever. That'd be it. And in secondary school, you'd rehearse for choir and the trad group, but it wouldn't be this thing where, oh, we've choir practice every week. It might be like a rush thing a week before the event. So I think in that perspective, it's definitely pushed to the side. Oh, you know, we don't need to keep practicing this. We'll just do it a week before, it'll be grand. I think that's definitely a bit damaging, I guess you could say as well. But yeah, as Katie said, I think they're definitely looked on as extracurricular activities and not like, you know, subjects like I suppose the rest. I mean, everyone just seems to be so focused on the typical maths, Irish, English, whatever. and the arts just seem to get pushed to the side a bit.
And do you think that's because of the way they're perceived in society at large, or do you think it's because they're enjoyable and therefore, you know, education, we have this idea that education shouldn't be something that we enjoy, and that if we enjoy it, then we're not learning?
Yeah, I was kind of thinking that, but I didn't really know was it appropriate to say. But I mean, I definitely have met the odd person who, when I say, oh yeah, I'm doing music in college, they kind of go, oh right, okay, Jesus. You know, so I suppose, yeah, you are right in saying that. I mean, maybe people are jealous, and maybe they look at us as in, oh, they're really enjoying themselves, you know, having a good time doing what they want, you know, rather than doing maybe a boring job that other people don't want, you know.
But
Might be a bit scared. Sorry,
we assume that the hard people who are doing the hard sciences aren't enjoying them. I mean, it's a strange way of understanding what people study and why. You know, my hobby is neuroscience, and I do it for fun. This is completely upside down. And Aoife, what do you think?
Yeah, I know. I guess like that I suppose a lot of value nowadays is placed on the objective. Like, and you know, in the last however many, I don't know, like since science like properly started, what about like you know, it's only been at 600 years of like properly documented science, and that I think yeah, that because of that new value placed on objectivity, things that are more sort of subjective get pushed aside sometimes. But it's like, I don't know, I guess that's it, the whole world, you know, everything is a subjective experience for us, you know, that we react emotionally not to, oh, Aoife is speaking in this panel, but you know, Aoife's getting flustered because she has to speak to loads of people. You know, it's a completely subjective thing. And that like science and like any of the more any subject like that is like subjective too, and I feel like it's about looking at how to like, I guess, sort of like integrate the two. That it's like anything, you know, it's two like polarities, but the right way of being is somewhere in between. Yeah, and I think as well with like primary schools and secondary schools, like a lot of people who I know who've gone into something creative have had, you know, like a lot of people coming into the primary schools and into the secondary schools, and I think that really makes a difference. And I guess maybe sometimes the issue is like knowing whose responsibility it is to initiate that process, because you know, if you're a teacher in primary school, your core objective, you know, is getting everyone through it and getting people out and making sure, you know, well, maybe if someone else is coming in, that'll overwhelm them, or you know. And then if you're on the outside and you're going, oh well, I would like to come into a primary school, but maybe this isn't the space for me, or you know, maybe it is too rigidly structured. And once again, it's finding that kind of middle ground. And I think yeah, that I guess that just comes down to people opening up more or wanting to meet the other halfway. That it's like, I don't know, you know, that I think every problem in the world you can kind of locate somewhere within yourself, and if you're trying to work on that, and if everyone's trying to work on that, then I guess that's how everything changes.
Well, what a perfect note to conclude on. Thank you so much, Aoife, for that final reflection. And thanks to Marianne, who cheers us with "Here's to big, wide, loud mistakes." So important. So a big thank you to all of our speakers for a really interesting and engaging panel. I thoroughly enjoyed it. Thanks to all of our attendees for being here and for asking great questions. And thanks to the organisers of the seminar series, Dr. Ciara Murphy, Professor Patrick Lonergan, as well as to the technical manager of the seminar series, Dr. Sarah Hoover. You'll find this webinar on the YouTube channel next week, and all of the other webinars that have been hosted so far are there. So thanks very much, everyone.